Sarah Mitchell had always lived a quiet life. She wasn't rich, she wasn't famous, and she never looked for trouble. She worked at a small diner in a peaceful Oklahoma town, serving coffee to truckers and locals who all knew her by name. Her world was small but filled with love, especially for her only son, Jake. He was her reason to smile every single morning. Jake was 19, full of energy, dreams, and confidence. He had always loved the sound of engines, the smell of gasoline, and the freedom of the open road. Ever since he was little, he would stare in awe at motorcycles roaring down the highway. For his 18th birthday, Sarah had surprised him with a used dirt bike, and from that day, she knew her boy's heart belonged to the road. Still, Sarah worried. Every mother does. She often told Jake, "Promise me, you'll be careful." And Jake would always grin and say, "Don't worry, Mom. I got this." He was smart, kind, and responsible, at least that's what she believed. Life between the two was simple. Sarah would wake up early, make breakfast, and leave a note for Jake before heading to work. In the evenings, they'd watch movies together or sit on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. It wasn't a big life, but it was theirs. Then one Friday evening, everything changed. Sarah had been waiting for Jake to come home. He had gone out earlier that afternoon, saying he was going to meet some friends for a ride. It wasn't unusual, but by midnight, when he still hadn't come back, a strange feeling started to crawl inside her. She tried calling his phone, no answer. She sent a few messages, nothing. At first, she told herself not to panic. Maybe his phone battery had died. Maybe he was staying at a friend's place. But as the hours passed, her chest grew heavy. She couldn't sleep. Every sound outside made her jump. She sat by the window, staring at the road, waiting to see the headlight of Jake's bike. The next morning came and still no sign of him. Sarah called his friends one by one. Most of them hadn't seen him since the previous afternoon. One boy mentioned something that made her stomach twist. Jake had talked about meeting some bikers from a group called the Iron Serpents. They were older guys known around town for street races, loud fights, and trouble with the police. Sarah's heart sank. Jake was young, and sometimes young men wanted to prove themselves. Maybe he had joined them for fun, or maybe something had gone wrong. She drove to the police station that afternoon, clutching a photo of Jake in her hands. "My son's missing," she told the officer at the desk. The man asked routine questions. When was the last time she saw him? Did he have any enemies? Had he ever run away before? Sarah answered each one carefully, but the officer didn't seem too worried. "Ma'am, your son's 19, he said. "Maybe he just needed some space. Young guys do that." But Sarah knew her son. He would never leave without telling her. He would never just vanish. When she left the station, the sun was setting, and tears filled her eyes. For the first time in her life, she felt helpless. She walked into Jake's room and sat on his bed. The posters on the wall, bikes, racing tracks, and adventure quotes, stared back at her like memories frozen in time. On his desk lay a half-open notebook. Inside was a list of biker clubs he wanted to visit. At the bottom of the page, circled twice, were the words, Iron Serpents, Tulsa. That was her clue. She didn't sleep that night either. She just sat there, thinking of every possible reason her boy might be gone. Her mind played horrible pictures. What if he was hurt? What if he was trapped? What if he was gone forever? But one thought burned brighter than the rest. She couldn't sit and do nothing. Sarah had always been gentle and quiet. People often said she was too soft-hearted for the world. But love changes people. It turns fear into courage and doubt into determination. That night, she made a decision that would change her life forever. She packed a small bag with water, snacks, and Jake's photograph. Then she walked to the old shed behind the house, where her late brother's things were kept. Among the dusty boxes, she found a small handgun, still in its case. Her brother had taught her the basics years ago, though she never imagined she would ever need to use it. She held it in her hand, feeling its cold weight, and whispered, "I'll bring him home." The next morning, she called in sick to work, got in her truck, and started driving. She didn't know where this road would lead her, but she knew one thing for sure. No one, not even a gang of bikers, would keep her from finding her son. As she drove down the highway, her heart pounded with fear and hope. The world outside seemed colder, sharper. Every passing mile felt like a test of her courage. But Sarah didn't care how dangerous it was. For a mother's love, even the quietest woman can become unstoppable. That's how her journey began. Not with anger or revenge, but with love strong enough to face anything. Sarah Mitchell, the quiet woman from a small Oklahoma town, was about to walk into a world of steel, leather, and danger. And no one, not even the iron serpents, would forget her name. 2 days had passed since Jake went missing, and every hour felt like a lifetime for Sarah. She hadn't eaten properly, hadn't slept, and every sound outside made her heart jump. Her house, once full of warmth and laughter, now felt cold and empty. The chair Jake always sat in was still pulled out from the table. His helmet lay on the counter, and his favorite jacket hung near the door. It was as if he had just stepped out and would come back any minute. But he didn't. Sarah tried calling again and again, but his phone was still off. She sent message after message. "Jake, please call me. I'm worried. Just tell me you're okay." Each one remained unread. The silence was worse than any answer. By the third morning, Sarah's worry had turned into fear. She knew something was very wrong. She decided to go back to the police station. Maybe this time they would listen. But when she got there, the same officer from before looked up from his desk and sighed. "Ma'am, we can't file a missing person report unless it's been 72 hours, or unless there's evidence of danger," he said gently. "Evidence of danger?" Sarah repeated, her voice shaking. "My son is missing, and he never disappears like this." The officer looked sympathetic but tired. "We'll keep an eye out, ma'am," he said. "But young men his age sometimes just need a break." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. A break? Jake was not the kind of boy to run away. He always called, always told her where he was. The police didn't understand. They didn't know her son. When she stepped outside, the afternoon sun was blazing, but Sarah felt cold inside. She sat in her truck, gripping the steering wheel tightly, trying to think. There had to be someone who knew where Jake was. Someone he trusted. She pulled out her phone and began calling his friends again. One by one, they answered. Some sleepy, some confused, all saying the same thing. "We haven't seen him." But when she called one of Jake's close friends, Tyler, his tone changed the moment she mentioned the iron serpents. "Wait, Jake went to see them?" Tyler asked, his voice suddenly nervous. "Mrs. Mitchell, that's not good. Those guys aren't normal bikers." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked quickly. "They're a rough group," Tyler said. "They hang out at a bar off Highway 62. They race illegally, fight a lot. People say they deal with stuff too, you know? Jake said he wanted to check out their bikes. He thought they were cool. I told him to stay away." Sarah's heart pounded. Highway 62. A biker gang. It didn't sound like Jake at all. But what if he got caught up in something he couldn't handle? She thanked Tyler and hung up, her hands trembling. That night, she couldn't sit still. She sat on the porch, staring at the stars, remembering the last time she saw Jake. He had hugged her before leaving, smiling as always. "Don't worry, Mom," he'd said. "I'll be back before dinner." That was the last thing he told her. She whispered into the night, "Where are you, baby?" The next morning, Sarah decided to drive to the diner where she worked. Not to serve customers, but to ask questions. The diner was a local hangout. Truckers, mechanics, even bikers came by sometimes. Maybe someone had seen Jake. She showed his photo to everyone, the waitresses, the cook, even a group of men at the counter. Most shook their heads, but one old trucker looked up and said, "That boy? Yeah, I saw him 2 nights ago, at the gas station down the road. He was with a group of guys on big black bikes. Looked nervous." Sarah's breath caught. "Do you remember what direction they went?" The man nodded slowly. "North. Toward the highway." That was all she needed. It wasn't much, but it was a direction and hope. She went back home, sat at the kitchen table, and took out a notebook. She began writing down everything she knew. Jake last seen Friday night. With bikers, iron serpents. Possibly near Highway 62. She stared at the list, her mind racing. If the police wouldn't help, she would have to do it herself. She didn't know how, but she couldn't wait any longer. Sarah remembered her brother's words from long ago. If you ever want the truth, you have to go and find it yourself. She stood up, took Jake's photo from the wall, and whispered, "I'm coming for you." Before she left, she walked into his room again. The sunlight filtered through the window, lighting up the dust in the air. Everything in the room smelled like Jake. His cologne, his leather jacket, the faint scent of oil from his bike gear. She touched the helmet sitting on the shelf, her fingers tracing his name written on it. "Hang on, sweetheart," she whispered. "I'll find you." She packed her bag again, this time adding a flashlight, a map, and a small first aid kit. She looked at the handgun lying on the table. It scared her, but not as much as the thought of losing Jake forever. She picked it up, checked the safety, and slipped it into her bag. Before starting the truck, she looked in the mirror. The tired woman staring back didn't look like the same gentle waitress from a week ago. Her eyes were sharper now, filled with something new, determination. She started the engine and pulled out of the driveway. The sound of gravel under the tires echoed through the quiet street. The morning sky was turning gray, as if warning her of what lay ahead. But Sarah didn't care. She was done waiting for help. If her son was with those bikers, then she would find them herself, no matter how dangerous it was. And so began her long, lonely search. A mother's journey into a world she didn't understand, guided only by love, fear, and a desperate hope that her boy was still alive. Sarah woke up early the next morning, her eyes heavy from another sleepless night. The sun had barely risen, and her small house was quiet except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. She sat at the table with a cup of cold coffee, staring at the map she had spread in front of her. Her fingers traced the road that led to Highway 62, the same road where the biker gang, the Iron Serpents, was last seen. Somewhere along that road, her son was out there, alone, maybe scared, maybe hurt. Her heart ached just thinking about it. She could still picture Jake's smile, the way he'd tease her for worrying too much. "Mom, relax," he'd always say. But now, that voice only echoed in her mind, fading a little more each day. She couldn't just sit and wait anymore. The police weren't helping, and time was running out. Sarah stood up and walked to the small hallway where her brother's old things were kept. Her brother, Mark, had been in the military years ago. Before he passed away, he had taught her a few things: how to stay calm, how to defend herself, and how to shoot a gun safely. She had never thought she would need any of that knowledge. But now, every lesson he'd ever given her came back in flashes. His voice, steady and patient, echoed in her head. "Courage doesn't mean you're not scared, sis. It means you go anyway." She opened a wooden box that had been sitting untouched for years. Inside lay her brother's old pistol, still clean and carefully oiled. For a long moment, she just stared at it. The weight of what she was about to do sank in. She wasn't a cop. She wasn't trained for danger. She was just a mother. A waitress who'd spent her life making coffee and caring for her son. But love has a strange way of giving people strength they never knew they had. Her hands trembled as she picked up the gun. Felt cold, heavy, and terrifying. She checked the safety like Mark had taught her, then placed it gently in her bag. "I'm not going to use it," she whispered to herself. "It's just to protect me if I have to." She looked around the kitchen one last time, at the family photos on the fridge, the calendar marked with Jake's college start date, the half-empty cereal box he'd left behind. Every little thing reminded her of him. Tears filled her eyes, but she wiped them away quickly. "No more crying," she told herself. "Not now." Before leaving, she called her friend, Emma, who worked at the diner with her. "Emma, I might not come to work for a few days," she said softly. "Is it about Jake?" Emma asked, her voice full of worry. "Yes," Sarah replied. "I think I know where to look. Please don't tell anyone. Okay?" There was a pause on the other end. "Sarah, be careful. Those bikers, they're dangerous." I will, Sarah said, forcing a calm tone. I just need to bring my son home. She ended the call, took a deep breath, and stepped outside. The morning air was cool, carrying the scent of wet grass. Her old pickup truck waited by the curb, rusty but reliable. She climbed in, started the engine, and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. Her heart was pounding hard enough to hurt. Then she whispered, "For you, Jake," and pressed the gas. The road stretched out endlessly ahead of her, winding between empty fields and dusty gas stations. Every mile felt like a step deeper into the unknown. She stopped once to refuel and buy some snacks, just energy bars and water, then got back on the road. As she drove, memories kept flooding her mind. She remembered Jake's first day of school, how he'd cried and clung to her leg. She remembered teaching him to ride his first bike, how he'd fallen and scraped his knee but jumped up, laughing. "I'm okay, Mom," he'd said. That was Jake, brave and stubborn just like his Uncle Mark. The more she thought about him, the stronger her resolve grew. She wasn't going to give up. Not now. Hours later, she stopped at a small roadside diner near the edge of town. A few motorbikes were parked outside. Her pulse quickened as she walked in. The place smelled of grease and smoke, and the sound of deep laughter filled the air. She ordered a coffee and tried to listen quietly. A group of men in leather jackets sat a few tables away, their jackets marked with the same logo, a snake wrapped around a skull. The iron serpents. Her breath caught, but she didn't let them see her fear. She took a small sip of her coffee and pretended to scroll through her phone while listening to their conversation. One of the bikers said, "That kid last night thought he could just walk away with our bike parts. Stupid move." Another laughed harshly. "Yeah. Boss said we'd teach him a lesson." Sarah's stomach twisted. They could be talking about Jake. Her hands tightened around her cup. She wanted to scream, to ask them where her son was, but she knew it wasn't time yet. She had to stay calm. She watched as they finished their meals, paid, and left on their roaring bikes. When she stepped outside, she noticed one of them had dropped a small receipt. It had the name of a bar written on it, the Pit Stop, along with an address. She didn't know what she would find there, but it was another clue, another thread leading to Jake. Sarah picked up the receipt, folded it into her pocket, and looked out at the long, empty road ahead. She could feel her heart thudding, but her fear had started to fade, replaced by something stronger, purpose. She wasn't just a mother anymore. She was a woman on a mission, and nothing, not the iron serpents, not fear, not even danger itself, was going to stop her from finding her son. The road to the biker bar felt longer than anything Sarah had ever driven before. The sun was already low in the sky, painting everything in shades of red and gold. Her old truck rattled as it rolled over the cracked highway, but she didn't care. Her heart was racing with fear and determination. The address written on the small receipt she found led her to a place called the Pit Stop. From what she'd heard, it was more than just a bar. It was where the iron serpents ruled. As she got closer, the sound of engines echoed in the distance. A group of bikers passed her on the road, their black leather jackets shining in the evening light, the same snake and skull symbol printed on their backs. Her grip tightened on the steering wheel. Her heart pounded so hard that she could hear it. She didn't know what she would find there. She only knew one thing. She had to be brave. When she finally arrived, the place looked rough and dangerous. The building was old and half-broken, with neon lights flickering above the entrance. Dozens of motorcycles were parked out front in a messy line, each one shining under the fading sunlight. Loud rock music played from inside, mixed with shouting and laughter. It was the kind of place where most people would never dare to walk in alone, especially not a quiet woman like Sarah. She parked her truck a little away from the bar and turned off the engine. For a moment, she just sat there, staring at the entrance. She could see the shadows of big men moving around inside, and her hands began to shake. Her mind whispered, "Don't go in. They're dangerous. You can't do this." But then she looked at the photo of Jake lying on the seat beside her. His smile, his eyes, his promise that he'd be back soon. That was all she needed. Sarah took a deep breath and whispered, For you, Jake. Before stepping out of the truck. The sound of her boots crunching on the gravel was lost under the noise of engines and laughter. She adjusted her jacket, pushed open the heavy door, and walked inside. The bar was dark and smoky. The air smelled of beer, gasoline, and sweat. Music played from an old jukebox in the corner, and nearly every man inside turned his head to look at her. A few of them stopped talking. It was rare to see a woman like her in a place like this, small, quiet, wearing a worn-out denim jacket, not leather. Sarah felt their eyes on her as she walked slowly toward the counter. Her heart was pounding so hard it hurt, but she kept her chin up. The bartender, a rough-looking man with a gray beard, raised an eyebrow. "What can I get you, lady?" he asked, wiping a glass with a rag. "I'm looking for someone," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. She took out the photo from her pocket and placed it on the counter. "My son. His name's Jake. He's 19. Have you seen him?" The bartender glanced at the picture, then looked up at her with an unreadable expression. Before he could answer, a group of bikers at a nearby table started laughing. One of them, a tall man with tattoos climbing up his neck, got up and walked over. "Hey boys," he said loudly. "Looks like someone's lost their kid." The others roared with laughter. Sarah's hands tightened into fists, but she didn't back away. The man leaned closer, grinning. "You really think your boy came here, lady? This isn't a daycare." "I'm not joking," Sarah said firmly. "He came to meet some of your people, the Iron Serpents." The man's grin faded just slightly. Then he looked at his friends and smirked. "You hear that? She knows our name. Maybe the kid joined us and forgot to call home." More laughter followed. One man at the back shouted, "Maybe the kid realized he likes real bikes and real men." Sarah felt anger rising in her chest, stronger than her fear. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice shaking now, not from weakness but from fury. "Tell me where my son is." The tall man stepped closer, his smile gone. "And what if we don't?" he said softly, his tone suddenly dark. Sarah's breath caught. The room went quiet, and for a moment, she thought he might hurt her. But instead of backing down, she reached behind her back and pulled out the gun. Slowly, carefully, just like her brother had taught her. The metal gleamed under the dim bar light. Gasps filled the room. A few men stood up, and chairs scraped against the floor. The laughter stopped instantly. Sarah's hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. "I'm not here to fight," she said. "I'm here for my son." The tall man froze, staring at her. For a few seconds, no one moved. The music from the jukebox stopped, and the only sound left was the buzzing of the neon sign outside. Sarah held her ground, her eyes locked on the man's. Then, from the back of the room, a deep voice spoke. "Put it down, lady." Everyone turned to see an older man standing near the corner booth, the leader of the Iron Serpents. His gray hair was tied back, his eyes calm but sharp. He wore the same jacket as the others, but his presence was heavier, colder. Sarah looked at him but didn't lower the gun. "Where's my son?" she demanded. The man studied her for a moment, then slowly stood up and walked forward. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said. "No one walks in here like this." Sarah didn't speak. She just waited, her heart beating fast. The man looked at the photo still lying on the counter. Then he sighed. "You're looking for Jake, right?" Her throat felt dry as she nodded. He turned his head toward the back door and said, "He's out there. Go get your boy." Sarah's knees almost gave out from relief, but she didn't move until she was sure it wasn't a trick. The man lifted his hand. "Go. You've got my word." The rest of the bikers stayed silent, their laughter gone, replaced by a strange mix of respect and fear. Sarah lowered the gun but kept it close as she walked past them. None of them dared to stop her. Outside, under the dim light behind the bar, she finally saw him, her son, sitting against the wall, bruised but alive. And in that moment, every mile she'd driven, every tear she'd cried, and every ounce of fear she'd felt had been worth it. The air inside the biker bar grew heavy after Sarah spoke. The laughter that once filled the room had vanished, replaced by a thick silence that made every second feel longer. Dozens of eyes watched her. Cold, curious, some even angry. The smell of beer and smoke lingered as she stood there, her trembling hand still holding the gun. For a moment, nobody said a word. Then, slowly, the tall biker with tattoos up his neck, the same one who had mocked her earlier, began to chuckle again. "You think you scare us, lady?" he said, taking a step closer. "You walk in here with that toy and think we'll talk?" Sarah didn't blink. "I'm not here to scare anyone," she said softly. "I'm here for my son." Her voice was calm, but there was fire in her eyes. The biker stopped for a second, surprised that she didn't back down. Behind him, a few of the others started to laugh again. Nervous laughter this time, unsure whether to mock her or stay quiet. "Your son?" one of them shouted from the back. "Maybe he's cleaning the floors out back." The men burst into loud laughter again. Sarah's jaw tightened. "Enough," she said, raising her voice slightly. "Where is he?" The tall biker leaned forward, so close she could smell the alcohol on his breath. "You think we're going to tell you anything?" he sneered. "You're lucky we don't throw you out right now." Sarah didn't move. Her heart was beating wildly, but she kept her voice steady. "If you hurt him," she said quietly, "I swear I'll make sure every single one of you regrets it." Something in her tone made the man hesitate. It wasn't loud or threatening, but it was real. It was the voice of a mother who had already lost everything except her will to fight. He stared at her for a long moment, his smirk slowly fading. Then, from the corner of the room, another man laughed again. "This is funny," he said. "She really thinks she's tough." He grabbed a pool cue from the rack and spun it lazily in his hand. "Maybe we should teach her some respect." Sarah's stomach turned, but she didn't show fear. Her finger brushed lightly against the trigger. Not to fire, but to remind herself that she wasn't powerless. "Don't," she said firmly, locking eyes with him. The biker paused, studying her. Something in her eyes stopped him. A quiet strength that didn't belong in this place. At that moment, the older man, the leader of the Iron Serpents, finally stood up from his booth. The room went silent again. He was tall and broad, his beard gray and his jacket worn with years of rough living. He had the kind of presence that made others listen. "That's enough," he said in a deep, steady voice. The laughter died instantly. The bikers stepped back, muttering to each other but obeying. The leader walked slowly toward Sarah, his heavy boots echoing on the wooden floor. "You've got guts, lady," he said. "Most people wouldn't last 2 minutes in here." Sarah lowered the gun slightly but didn't put it away. Her hands were shaking now, but she stood her ground. "My son came here," she said. "He's 19. He was with some of your men 2 nights ago. Tell me where he is." The leader didn't answer right away. He looked at her for a long moment, then turned to his men. "Who brought in a kid 2 nights ago?" The tall biker looked uncomfortable now. He scratched his head and muttered, "Yeah, we found some kid snooping around near the track. Said he was just watching. Thought he was trying to steal from us." Sarah's eyes widened. "Steal? My son would never do that." The leader turned back to her, his face unreadable. "Maybe he wasn't. Maybe my men got it wrong. Either way, he's not here now." Sarah felt a rush of anger. "Then where is he?" she demanded. The tall biker looked away, avoiding her gaze. "Out back," he said finally. "He's fine." Sarah didn't wait. She started walking toward the back door, but 2 bikers moved to block her path. "Hold on," one of them said. "You don't just walk through here like you own the place." The leader raised a hand, stopping them. "Let her go." His voice was quiet but firm. The men stepped aside. Sarah gave him a small nod of thanks and started toward the door. But just before she reached it, she heard someone whisper behind her, "Man, she's crazy." Another voice replied, "Or desperate." She didn't turn around. She knew they didn't understand, they couldn't. They didn't know what it felt like to wake up every day wondering if your child was alive or dead. When she pushed open the back door, the cold night air hit her face. Her knees almost gave way when she saw Jake sitting against the wall near a stack of crates. His face was bruised, his lip bleeding, but his eyes opened when he heard the door. "Mom!" he whispered, disbelief and shame mixing in his voice. "Jake!" Sarah ran to him and dropped to her knees. Her hands shook as she touched his face, afraid that if she wasn't gentle, he might disappear. "Oh my God, are you okay?" He tried to smile, but it hurt. "I'm fine, Mom. I messed up." Behind them, the leader stood in the doorway watching quietly. "He got caught in the wrong place," he said. "But he's alive. Take him and go." Sarah turned to him, her voice breaking. "Thank you." He nodded once. "You've got more courage than most people I've met," he said. "Not many would walk into this place like you did." She stood up, helping Jake to his feet. He leaned on her shoulder as they walked toward the truck. The bikers inside the bar watched silently as the door closed behind them. For the first time in days, Sarah could finally breathe again. Her hands were still shaking, but now it wasn't from fear. It was from relief. Her boy was alive. As they reached the truck, Jake looked at her with wide eyes. "Mom," he said softly, "you brought a gun?" She gave a small, tired smile. "I wasn't going to use it," she said. "But they didn't know that." Jake laughed weakly, and Sarah felt her heart lift just a little. They had faced danger, fear, and humiliation, but love had won. And as the truck drove away into the dark night, the laughter from the bar faded behind them, replaced by silence and the sound of freedom. Sarah stood there in the middle of the biker bar, her heart pounding so hard that she could hear it in her ears. Her hands shook slightly, but she didn't lower the gun. The men around her stared in silence, their faces tense and confused. A few minutes ago, they had been laughing, mocking her like she was just some scared woman who had lost her way. But now no one was laughing. The quiet in the room felt heavier than the smoke that hung in the air. The tall biker with the tattoos on his neck swallowed hard. "Lady, you don't want to do this," he said, his tone suddenly softer. Sarah's voice was calm but firm. "I told you," she said. "I'm not here to start a fight. I'm here for my son." Her eyes didn't move away from the man's face. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. She could see a few of the bikers exchanging nervous glances, whispering to one another. Some looked angry, some looked impressed. Finally, one man muttered, "She's crazy." Sarah heard him but didn't respond. She wasn't crazy. She was desperate. Desperate for the only person in the world who truly mattered to her. The older man, the leader, took a slow step forward. His boots thudded against the wooden floor. "Put the gun down," he said in a low voice. "No one here's gonna hurt you." Sarah didn't move. "I'll put it down," she said, "when I see my son. Until then, it stays right here." The leader stopped a few feet away. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp, studying her. "You've got guts," he said finally. "Most folks who come in here wouldn't dare look me in the eye. But you walked straight in like you own the place." "I don't own anything," Sarah replied quietly. "But I do know that you have something that belongs to me." The room went silent again. The men looked from her to their leader, unsure of what to do. The tension was so thick that even the old jukebox in the corner seemed to have stopped humming. The leader took a deep breath and said, "Your son, the kid with the brown hair, black jacket." Sarah nodded quickly. "Yes, that's him. He came around here a couple of nights ago," the man said slowly. "He was asking questions, talking big. My boys thought he was trying to get into something he shouldn't. Things got heated." Sarah's stomach dropped. "He's alive?" she asked, her voice trembling. The man nodded once. "He's out back." Sarah almost cried right there. Her knees felt weak, but she didn't let her guard down. "Take me to him," she said. The tall biker with tattoos took a step forward as if to argue, but the leader shot him a hard look. "Stay put," he ordered. Then he looked back at Sarah. "You've got my word. No one's gonna stop you. Go get your boy." Sarah finally lowered the gun, keeping it at her side but ready. She moved slowly toward the back door, her steps careful and her eyes watching every shadow. The men moved aside as she passed, not because they were afraid of the gun, but because they saw something stronger in her. Determination, a mother's love. As she reached the back door, the leader spoke again, his voice softer now. You know, he said, a lot of people come here with weapons, thinking they can scare us. You didn't come here for power. You came here for love. That's different. Sarah paused for a moment, then looked at him. Love can make people do things they never thought they could, she said quietly. When she stepped outside, the cold night air hit her face. Behind the bar, the area was dimly lit by a single bulb hanging from a wire. And there, sitting on the ground against a stack of crates, was Jake. Her heart nearly stopped. He looked pale, tired, and bruised, but he was breathing. His head lifted slightly when he saw her, disbelief in his eyes. "Mom," he whispered, his voice shaky. Sarah dropped the gun and ran to him. She fell to her knees and pulled him into her arms, holding him so tight it hurt. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered over and over, "It's okay, baby. I've got you. I'm here now." Jake clung to her, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean for this to happen. They thought I stole something. I tried to explain, but they—" "Shoo," she said softly, brushing his hair back. "It doesn't matter now. We're going home." Behind them, the leader stepped outside and watched quietly. He lit a cigarette and took a slow drag before speaking. "He got caught in the wrong crowd," he said. "But he didn't deserve what happened." Sarah looked up at him, anger and gratitude mixing in her eyes. "No one ever does," she said. The man nodded slowly. "You're right. Go on. Get out of here." She helped Jake to his feet. He leaned on her shoulder, wincing in pain, but he managed to stand. As they walked toward the truck, the bikers inside the bar stayed silent, watching through the windows. No one said a word. When they reached the truck, Sarah opened the passenger door and helped Jake in carefully. Then she turned back and saw the leader still standing by the doorway. He raised his hand slightly, not as a threat, but as a quiet goodbye. Sarah nodded once in return, then climbed into the driver's seat. Her hands shook as she started the engine. The headlights cut through the dark, and the sound of the truck echoed through the quiet night. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The road stretched endlessly in front of them, lined with shadows and silence. Finally, Jake said softly, "Mom, you walked in there alone?" Sarah smiled weakly, her eyes still on the road. "Yes," she said. "I told them I was here for my son, and I meant it." Jake looked at her with awe. "Weren't you scared?" "I was terrified," she admitted. "But fear doesn't matter when someone you love is in danger. You do what you have to do." Jake leaned back in the seat, closing his eyes. "You're the bravest person I know." Sarah glanced at him and smiled, though tears still rolled down her cheeks. "No," she said softly. "I'm just a mom." As the truck disappeared into the distance, the night finally grew still again. Behind them, the lights of the biker bar faded away, leaving only the sound of the engine and a mother's steady breath. The sound of love that refused to give up. The night was quiet as Sarah drove down the empty road. The headlights cut through the darkness, and the hum of the engine was the only sound filling the silence. Jake sat beside her, his head resting against the window, his face pale but calm. The tension that had filled their hearts was slowly fading, but Sarah's mind was still racing. She had her son back, yes, but something still didn't feel right. There were questions burning in her mind that she couldn't ignore anymore. After a few minutes, she broke the silence. "Jake," she said softly, "I need you to tell me everything. What really happened?" Jake hesitated. He didn't look at her. His fingers played nervously with the rip in his jeans. "It's complicated, Mom," he said quietly. Sarah kept her eyes on the road. "I've been through enough to handle complicated," she said gently. "Please, just tell me." Jake sighed deeply. "I didn't just end up there by accident," he began. "Those bikers, they call themselves the Iron Serpents. I met one of them a few weeks ago at the garage near school. He said they needed someone who knew about engines. He made it sound like a small job. Fixing bikes, nothing illegal. I thought maybe I could make some money and help you out. Sarah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. You should have told me, she said, her voice trembling slightly. You don't have to fix our problems alone. I know, Jake whispered, but I wanted to help. You've done everything for me since Dad left. I just wanted to do something right for once. Sarah's eyes softened, but her heart ached. Oh, Jake, she said, her voice breaking. You don't need to prove anything. You're my son, that's enough. He looked at her, tears forming in his eyes. I didn't know they were into bad stuff, Mom. Not until it was too late. I saw them doing deals. Selling things that weren't supposed to be sold. When I tried to leave, they wouldn't let me. They said I knew too much. Sarah's heart pounded faster. So that's why they hurt you, she whispered. Jake nodded slowly. Yeah, they thought I told the cops. But I didn't. I just wanted out. Sarah pulled the truck over to the side of the road and turned off the engine. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. Then she looked at Jake. Really looked at him. His face was bruised, his clothes dirty, but beneath all that, he was still her boy, scared, young, and trying to be brave. Listen to me, she said softly but firmly. You made a mistake, but you're not a bad person. You were trying to help. That doesn't make you guilty. Jake wiped his eyes. Mom, I think they might come after me. After us. Sarah's stomach twisted at the thought. She shook her head. Not if I can help it, she said. For a long moment they sat in silence. Then Sarah turned the key and started the truck again. We're going to the police, she said. You'll tell them everything. The truth will protect us now. Jake looked terrified. Mom, those guys have people everywhere. If we go to the cops, they'll find out. Sarah glanced at him, her voice steady. I faced them once, Jake. I can face them again. But we're not running. Not anymore. Jake swallowed hard, nodding slowly. He could see the determination in her eyes, the same strength that had carried her into that bar without fear. They drove in silence for a while, the lights of the town slowly coming into view in the distance. Sarah's mind wandered to what had just happened, how close she had come to losing him forever. The image of those bikers laughing at her before she spoke replayed in her mind. They had underestimated her because she was quiet, because she looked harmless. But they hadn't understood what a mother's love could do. As they reached the small-town police station, Sarah parked the truck and turned to Jake. Are you ready? She asked. He nodded, though his voice was shaky. Yeah. Inside, the station was dimly lit. The night shift officer sitting behind the desk looking half asleep. When Sarah explained what had happened, his eyes widened. You went to the Iron Serpent's bar alone? He asked, disbelief in his voice. Sarah nodded. They had my son. I wasn't leaving without him. The officer shook his head slowly. You're lucky to be alive, ma'am. Those men are dangerous. Jake stepped forward. They're hiding drugs in their bikes, he said. I saw it with my own eyes. The officer grabbed a notepad. You're willing to make a statement? Yes, Jake said firmly. I'm done being scared. For the next hour, they told the officer everything. How Jake got involved, what he saw, who he met, even the names of the men who had hurt him. Sarah sat beside him, holding his hand when his voice began to shake. She was proud of him, not because he was brave, but because he was honest. When they were done, the officer promised to send a team to investigate. You should both stay somewhere safe tonight, he advised. We'll take it from here. As they left the station, the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon. The sky was painted with shades of pink and gold. Sarah took a deep breath, the first calm breath she'd taken in days. Jake looked at her, exhaustion in his eyes. Do you think they'll be okay, Mom? The other people working with them? Sarah thought for a moment. Maybe, she said softly. Maybe this will make them see that it's not too late to change. Just like you. He smiled weakly. I don't deserve a second chance. Sarah placed a hand on his cheek. We all do, she said. They drove home in silence, the warmth of the rising sun washing over them. Sarah glanced at her son again. bruised but safe, and felt her heart fill with gratitude. She had faced her greatest fear and won. Not with violence, not with anger, but with love, courage, and truth. As they pulled into their driveway, Jake leaned his head back and whispered, "Thanks for coming for me, Mom." Sarah smiled softly, tears glistening in her eyes. "Always," she said. "No matter where you are, I'll always come for you." And for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt peace. The nightmare was over. The truth had set them free. The morning sun painted the sky with soft orange light as Sarah and Jake sat on their porch. The air was quiet, calm. A kind of peace Sarah hadn't felt in a long time. Birds sang in the trees, and the world seemed almost too normal after everything they had been through. But deep inside, both of them knew life would never be exactly the same again. Sarah looked at her son, sitting there with a blanket over his shoulders, sipping tea. His face was still bruised, but the color was slowly returning. He looked tired but safe, and that was all that mattered to her. "You didn't sleep much," she said softly. Jake gave a small smile. "I kept thinking about everything that happened," he admitted. "It feels like a dream." Sarah nodded. "A bad dream," she said, "but one that's finally over." For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the rustle of the wind through the trees. Then Jake looked up and said, "Mom, I still can't believe you walked into that bar alone. You could have been killed." Sarah chuckled quietly, though her eyes glistened. "I didn't think about that," she said honestly. "When I realized they had you, all I could think was, I have to get my boy back." That was it. No fear, no plan, just love. Jake looked down at his hands. "I'm sorry for putting you through that, for being stupid." "Don't call yourself that," Sarah said, reaching over to touch his arm. "You made a mistake, but you learned from it. That's what matters." He nodded slowly, his voice low. "I just wanted to help you. I thought if I earned some money, maybe things would get easier." Sarah smiled sadly. "Money comes and goes, Jake. But you're all I've got. Nothing is worth losing you." He didn't answer right away, but his eyes filled with tears. "When they grabbed me," he said quietly, "I thought I'd never see you again. I was so scared. But then I heard your voice that night, shouting for me, and I knew you'd come." Sarah's chest tightened. "Of course I came," she said. "There's nothing in this world that could stop me." They sat in silence again, both lost in thought. Sarah's mind drifted back to the moment she faced those bikers. How they had laughed at her when she walked in. How their smiles faded when she said, "I'm here for my son." That one sentence had changed everything. It wasn't just words. It was a declaration of love and courage. She realized that sometimes, even the strongest men in the room couldn't match the strength of a mother's heart. Later that day, the police called. They had raided the Iron Serpent's hideout and arrested several members. Jake's statement had helped them find what they were hiding: drugs, stolen goods, and illegal weapons. The officer told Sarah, "You and your son did the right thing. You probably saved other kids from getting trapped, too." When she hung up, she looked at Jake proudly. "You see," she said, "telling the truth made a difference." Jake smiled weakly. "I guess it did. But I still can't believe they listened to me." "They listened," Sarah said, "because you were brave enough to speak." The following days were slow and peaceful. Jake began to heal not just physically but inside too. He helped Sarah around the house, fixed the truck, and even started looking for a part-time job at a real garage, a legal one this time. He didn't want to waste the second chance he'd been given. One afternoon, they went for a drive through the countryside. The air was crisp, and the fields stretched far and wide under the blue sky. Jake looked out the window and said, "It's strange. Everything looks normal, but I feel different." Sarah smiled. "That's because you've grown up," she said. "When you go through something hard, it changes you. It makes you see the world, and yourself, differently." Jake thought for a moment. "Do you think those bikers ever felt scared like I did?" Sarah nodded slowly. "Maybe. People do bad things for many reasons: fear, pain, loneliness. But fear doesn't excuse choices. Everyone has to decide what kind of person they want to be. Jake looked down deep in thought. I want to be someone you can be proud of, he said. Sarah's eyes softened. You already are, she whispered. That night, as the sun set, Sarah sat by Jake's bedside while he slept. The soft glow from the lamp fell across his face. He looked peaceful, like the little boy she used to tuck in years ago. Her heart swelled with gratitude. She had almost lost him, but fate had given her another chance. She whispered softly, Thank you, God, for bringing him back to me. In the days that followed, word about what happened spread quietly through the town. Some called Sarah a hero. Others couldn't believe the story was true. But to her, it didn't matter what people said. She hadn't done it for praise or recognition. She had done it for love. A few weeks later, while Sarah was grocery shopping, she saw a newspaper headline, Iron Serpent's leader faces prison. Evidence from local teen breaks case. She picked it up and smiled. The world finally knew the truth. When she showed it to Jake later, he blushed and said, I didn't want to be famous like this. Sarah laughed softly. Fame isn't the point. Doing the right thing is. He nodded, and for the first time since it all happened, Sarah saw peace in his eyes. That night, before going to bed, Jake hugged her tightly. You saved me, Mom, he whispered. Sarah hugged him back, tears in her eyes. No, she said gently. We saved each other. As she stood by the window later, watching the stars, Sarah thought about everything they had gone through. The fear, the danger, the courage, and the love that carried them through it all. She realized something important that night. True strength doesn't come from anger, power, or weapons. It comes from love, quiet, fierce, unstoppable love. The kind that makes a mother walk into a room full of danger without thinking twice. And as the wind rustled softly outside and her son slept safely under her roof, Sarah finally allowed herself to smile. The fight was over. The laughter, the fear, the darkness. All of it was behind them now. What remained was love. Pure, unbreakable love, the kind that no one could ever take away.